everyone? Welcome back. And today we are luckily joined by the man, the stand-up comic and host of MMA Roasted, Adam Hunter. Adam, it is a privilege and an honor to sit down and chat today, man. How are things with you today?
Things are good, man. I'm just in Alaska doing comedy and trying to write sketches for the MMA awards that are coming up.
Awesome, Adam. I want to get you on because I've always been a huge fan of stand-up comedy, and I have been for many years. Guys like Bobby Lee, Santino, Sebastian, Theo, D'Elia, Burton, Tom, the list goes on. And I want to kind of dial it back a little bit. What was your introduction into comedy, and when did you know that this is what you wanted to pursue as a career?
I've always been a big comedy fan. When I was younger, I used to watch like Def Comedy Jam and Andrew Dice Clay was really when I was younger. And then when I was in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I know what I didn't want to do, and that was just like was in this like race with everybody to get a good job, start a family. Like it just seemed like everybody was into. It was like our best years of our lives were going to be in college, and then we were going to then just settle. And I just was. I didn't really feel the need to. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something that I like. Well, maybe if I find something I love, then it won't be work. And I had a TV show in college, which it's a long story, but I ended up getting sued for $20 million. But I fell in love with the show. It was called These Nuts, and I hosted the show, and it was just a lot of fun. And I'm like, well, I can't believe people could be a talk show host for a living. So then I essentially dropped out of college, moved to New York, took a couple comedy classes. It was an acting class for a while, and then I was bored. I couldn't sit still, and I wrestled in high school and college. I was a pretty successful wrestler. I won the New England's 4 years in a row, and wrestled in college. And I think if I could just find something in show business where I wouldn't have to depend on anyone else but myself, then I could be good at it. And stand-up comedy was just sort of that. It was like you could be as good as you want to be based on how much time and effort you put into it. So I took a couple classes in New York, and I was doing comedy, and this is 22, 23 years ago, in laundromats and supermarkets, donut shops, and wherever they would have me. And that eventually led to me opening up a room where I handed out flyers for 5 years in New York City, Times Square, or people like would basically spit on me and tell me to get a job. And it was awful. It was really awful. But when did I know that this is something I wanted to do? Was probably because I moved to LA 2003, 2004, and I still wasn't making any money at it. I went through all my savings like within a month of living in LA. But after I got on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, I think the first time was like, wow, I can't believe I actually am here with all these amazing people that have gone before me. And then when I was on Last Comic Standing on NBC, it was a big competition show. That was where I was like, wow, I mean, they said these are the 10 best comics in the nation, which is not true. We weren't the 10 best comics in the nation, but the fact that, I was even that far in a competition where people would think it would be the 10 best comics in the country, So I think those were probably, that was like probably 12 years into it, 13 years into it.
For sure. So, Adam, look, there has been some talk going down about a potential Colby Covington and Khamzat Chimaev fight. And, I think it's a fight where really, if it goes down, us as fans, we all win, no matter the result. But just off where we stand today, if that fight does go down, how do you sort of view that fight happening? Who do you sort of see taking that fight just off where we stand today?
I mean, that fight would be incredible. I think Colby has more to lose in that fight than Chimaev does because just on where he's ranked. I don't think Chimaev is amazing, but he's never beaten a top 10 guy. I guess you could say what's his name was a top 10 guy, but he took it on short notice and it wasn't
Gilbert.
Gilbert he beat, right?
Yeah.
Gilbert. But I'm saying like Kevin Holland. I was thinking if that fight happens, the build-up's going to be insane. I just hope Colby doesn't get himself into a situation where they're not even allowed, because he might, the thing with like Chael Sonnen, it's like, when he went to Brazil and said, this is soap and this is and I saw, Big Nog feeding a bus, as a put a gas, like you kind of knew it was like tongue in cheek, even though people hated him. It was like, okay, this guy's this guy's a comedian, sort of. He's a comic, but a fighter. Whereas Colby just goes for the jugular. He doesn't necessarily. It's not like it's some of the stuff he says is funny, but some of the stuff you're just like, Matt Hughes got off the railroad before. You're just like, wow, And I know that Colby has said a lot of things even on my podcast where he hasn't really gotten in trouble for. Like Khabib wears his wife on his head so he can fuck it later. It's like stuff like that. But it's just, if he says that about Chimaev in front of a big audience, he really may have to watch his back because some of those people don't like fuck around over there, and you wonder how much trouble he's going to get into, to the point where it's like, and also you may have people rooting for Chimaev. It's just going to be a crazy buildup, because anyone who tells Colby, hey man, dial it back, he's not going to do it. He just won't do it. He'll just say anything. As far as the actual fight itself goes, I think it's one of those fights where if Chimaev doesn't get him out in the first round, Colby wins it.
Yeah.
Because his gas tank is unbelievable. I've never seen cardio like that. If Colby had more power, he'd be the perfect fighter. Unfortunately, it's like he ran into Usman, who has just a little bit more power than Colby. It's like pretty much the same. If you were going to build a fighter on a video game, it would be like, Usman would be, 10 point, if it was 1 to 10, he'd be 9.6, and Colby would be 9.4 or something. It would be one of those things. They're just so evenly matched. And Colby's my friend. I hope he doesn't get mad at me saying that, but it just, even like both those fights, I had them both even going into the 5th round. Well, the first fight was definitely even before Colby got hurt. And if Colby would have actually beaten him, you wonder if he hadn't got caught, he might have won that fight. And the second fight, it was just weird because Colby started real slow, almost gave away the first round. It wasn't until he got hurt that he came back, and I thought he won round 3, 4, and 5. But so I almost had the fight to draw, but because he was so much more hurt than Usman was in the second round, it was like, well, who did more damage, so.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we don't really know how good Chimaev is because he's never been hurt.
Yeah, 100%. Adam, arguably, the most anticipated fight is now 24 hours, just over 24 hours away, in Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. As someone who is involved in the sport in a capacity, it's an amazing fight and one that I've been most looking forward to all year. Who do you have winning that fight, and what is your opinion on that fight?
It's funny how this fight is like such a close fight, and yet is still not the most difficult fight to even predict. Like the Chandler Poirier fight, I have no idea who's going to win the fight. It's like it's exactly the same fighter. But people ask me, I'm like, I have no idea. I would say, once again, I'm going to talk around in circles, and I apologize because
go for it.
I hear people do this to me because I ask them a question, and then they give me, well, if he wins in the first. It's one of those things where it's like, Israel has been training MMA longer than Alex. The guy's fighting? Yeah, Alex, right? So he should win based on the fact that like Alex has not had to work on takedowns he's got like a 3 or 4 year head start on takedown defense, takedown, jiu-jitsu. I'm not sure if Alex ever even planned on going to MMA. So just on that alone, Israel should win. But then you go, well, he lost to him twice in kickboxing. Well, the first fight, I don't think he actually lost to him. I heard when people were saying that till I went and watched it. And you're like, okay, this is a pretty close. It was a very close fight. Second fight, he got stopped. So then you go, well, Israel's never beaten a guy that he's lost to. So a lot of times when someone beats you, they just have their number. They have your number mentally. I mean, you look at Matt Hughes and Dennis Hallman. Matt Hughes will be on a list of top 10, easily top 20, maybe people top 5. Dennis Hallman will probably be in top 100 if people are being generous, but he lost to him 2 times in under a minute. Certain times people just have your number. You look at Uriah Faber versus Matt Brown. People will say Uriah Faber had the better career than Matt Brown had, but for some reason he just couldn't beat Matt Brown. A lot of times it's like mentally when someone beats you, what does that do to you? You know, especially a guy like Israel, who's always been like the hammer, never been the nail. So I would still bet on Israel winning based on experience. I mean, this guy has like his 5th fight, and hasn't he lost a fight? He lost a fight,
First
right?
one, yeah, his first fight.
So he lost his first fight. So he lost his first fight, and then he didn't fight for a long time after that. So he obviously he probably said, "Fuck it, I'm not going back to MMA." I'm like, why would I? I mean, there's a lot of guys out there that try a different sport, they lose, and then they're not going back. You know, so I think Israel wins, but I don't know. I also think that we're giving this other guy superhero powers based on what he did to Sean Strickland, because Strickland had the worst game plan in the history. I've never seen a worse game plan. And normally, when something that happens, they go, "Oh yeah, I was right." Strickland goes, "I would do the same thing over and over again." Like he doesn't even. He's that much of an. Like, I couldn't believe it when he said I would do it again. So I don't know. I mean, but then he didn't look that good the fight before that. Like there was a fight that
Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva.
Yeah,
he got touched up. He got pushed against the cage. Yeah, it was interesting. And
the other guy who was in Glory, who everyone was saying was the next big thing, that lost to Khalil Roundtree. I forgot that guy's name.
Yep. Saki, isn't it?
Gokhan Saki. Yeah.
Everyone was saying that guy was the greatest thing ever, and he didn't have the greatest. And there's another guy that in my kickboxing class, a guy in Bellator that is like 4-0 in kickboxing, and everyone Raymond Daniels. Everyone's talking about Raymond Daniels is the greatest, but he doesn't do it. So certain guys, it's just like I don't know. It's different when you throw in a cage versus a ring, and then you throw in takedowns, and you know Israel Adesanya is in a really good camp, and I don't think he's one of these guys. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy where he's going to let his arrogance get the best of him. Yeah. You know, he's never been that guy. Let's go punch for punch. You know, it's just certain guys are like that, but I think it's just for him, winning is more important than looking good. I mean, we've seen that many times. I mean, look at the Romero fight. Yeah. It's like he doesn't necessarily care about. He's probably the most frustrating champion because a guy like Paulo Costa, he looks like the greatest fighter of all time, and then he fights Romero, and people are like, "I hate this guy." Yeah. And then he fights the next guy, and he looks like he's one of those guys that, depending on his last fight, is how interested people are in like watching him. I hate fighters like that. I mean, it's just those guys are the worst because you never know which guy's going to show up. Yeah. So I mean, this literally could be the worst fight. This could be two guys staring at each other for 5 rounds.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah, it's very similar almost to when Tyron Woodley was champion. He'd have performances where he looks like the greatest welterweight that's ever lived, and then he'd have performances where, you know, he sets the record for the least amount of strikes thrown in a title fight. His reign was at some points very frustrating as a fan, but something that branches off somewhat from the MMA world. But as a fan of a sport, I wanted to get your opinion on. Were you surprised to see Jake Paul beat Anderson Silva? Because going into the fight, you know, I did have Anderson winning because he's an MMA guy. I have to support my own, but I could kind of see a few traps on the wall in terms of Anderson's age, the fact that Jake has been active in boxing. But were you surprised to see Jake Paul beat Anderson Silva?
I mean, you know, anytime I look at someone's record during the fight, I'm either super impressed by him, like, who the fuck is this guy? Or I'm like, you got me. And this is one of those you got me moments where halfway through this fight, I look at Anderson Silva's record and I'm realizing he hasn't won a fight since 2015. So he literally, I mean, aside from the Derek Brunson fight, which I think he lost, he beat Nick Diaz, who wasn't even in the weight class, who was like lying down. And Nick Diaz hadn't won a fight against, his last win, I think, was BJ Penn. Maybe he fought. It was one of those things where both of these guys hadn't really. So then I was like, okay, so now I'm looking at a 47-year-old guy. Well, like, whoa, but he did look good against Tito Ortiz. But then you look at like, well, Tito Ortiz was never a boxer, even in Tito Ortiz's prime. In his prime, Dana White challenged to a boxing match because Dana White like used to manage him or used to hold mitts for him and thought he could beat him in boxing. So then you go, okay, well, he beat Chavez Jr., right? And that Chavez Jr. went the distance against Sergio the guy from the Contender, or no, he went the distance against a couple really good guys, against Canelo and against that. But then I Google his name, and then the first thing that comes up is Chavez Sr. worried about Chavez Jr.'s drug problem, and he's on suicide watch. So like, okay, well, it didn't tell you when he started the drug problem, but you're starting to think maybe this dude just beat a really bad version of Chavez Jr. Who was on drugs, who was never. I mean, let's be honest. He was never a great fighter anyway. Like he won some belts, but if it wasn't his father wasn't Chavez, no one would ever have heard of Chavez Jr. Like I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So you go, okay, well, this was actually a brilliant move by Jake Paul to pick this guy, and his last MMA fight, he got knocked out by Uriah Hall. He'd been knocked out by Chris Weidman. He got knocked out by all these guys. So that being said, I'm just the thing I'm most surprised about Jake Paul is his time management, because he makes it seem like he's driving in Bentleys and fucking Instagram models, and he's traveling here and he's traveling there and he's partying, and that's what you see. But then they're like, well, this dude trains every day, and 2 a day, 3 a days. Most people that do that, that's all they do. So I got to give him a lot of credit for making it appear as he's just a YouTuber but no, Jake Paul is a very talented athlete who I also know from people that fought him. I'm not going to say their names, but they never got tested for their fights. So I'm pretty sure he's on TRT, if not other good stuff. And he's probably above average boxer. He's probably not in the top 200. There's probably a guy ranked number 500 who could beat Jake Paul in his weight class. One of these guys from Uzbekistan or one of these guys, boxers, but he'll never fight that guy. Yeah. And that's the sad part is that, in the NBA, it's the best basketball players. It doesn't matter where you're from. I mean, PFL, to their credit, it doesn't matter how many followers you have on Instagram or Twitter. If you win the million, you win the million. Yeah. Jake Paul has created his own league where in order to get in the league, you must have followers or have been good at one point and people know who you are. But there's no rankings. I don't know if people will ever know how good Jake Paul is, because he'll never fight the number 11 guy or the number 27 guy or the number 40 guy. And I've never. It's quite fascinating and amazing that somebody could, because you can't do this in other sports. Like if I go to watch the NHL hockey league, they're not going to put the best 5 guys sitting there, but that guy's got a lot of followers and this guy was good in '84, and I'm going to be like, get me out of here. This is not. I want to see the best hockey players. But Jake Paul has created this bizarro world where you don't know how. I mean, I just know from sports that anyone could look good against somebody who's not good, and like you could look like a world beater if you put somebody in there against somebody who sucks. But until you fight somebody who's like on your level, or I don't know how good Jake Paul is. I don't know how good he is because we've never actually seen him against anyone that's even a boxer. Yeah,
100%. Adam, speaking on your sort of stand-up career, there's been many crazy moments over the year in stand-up. I think recently, with the Dave Chappelle getting bombarded on stage, and who could forget Rogan and Mencia back in the day. But one thing I wanted to know was, what's one of the strangest things you've encountered whilst performing a set?
If you look up comedian attacked at wedding, I got hired to perform at a wedding one time, and they didn't tell anyone they told me to roast people, but gave me no information. And some guy who looked like he was part of the Goo Goo Dolls got upset and charged me and pushed me. This is while they were getting married, so that's on. It was just ridiculous. Then the grandma started yelling at me, and the guy started pacing back. That was a strange. I did a comedy at a nudist colony, and everybody was butt naked, but me. The most out of shape people. I got a standing ovation. It was awful. So yeah, I mean, I've had fights break out. I've had girls flash. I've had during kid shows on cruise ships, somebody yell out, "I masturbate!" Like there's like 3-year-olds around. And I've had menus thrown in my head. Yeah, I try to put myself in the most ridiculous situations so that nothing kind of rattles me.
I saw that one. I saw that one on your Instagram where you were performing and the manager came and grabbed the mic.
Oh yeah, the bar manager started making announcements that if you're going to drink, go that way. I'm like, how about don't drink and drive at all? That was.
Oh, no, I saw that.
So ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, those are like, I actually did a show in Wuhan, China, where they didn't even tell us that they couldn't get the translation that we were comedians and not a rock band. And they said we have to have a smoke machine. And we're like, well, we don't want a smoke machine. They're like, well, every performer has to have a smoke machine. So then when they introduced me, like just smoke, I couldn't see anybody. Like for like 5 minutes, I was covered in smoke.
Oh God. So Adam, look, a bit of a different question, but off the top of your head, what's been the most brutal fight that you have watched as a fan of MMA, in the sense of where, and I think us all as fans have, you kind of reached that point where you're watching an amazing fight, but as a fan, you kind of almost want the fight to stop because it's just so brutal. So for me personally, my one was Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Cachoeira, the event that eventually got Mario Yamasaki essentially banned from refereeing in the UFC because Priscilla ate essentially 200 unanswered shots, and that was very brutal for me to see as a fan. So for you, what's sort of the fight you've seen where it's the most brutal and you kind of want it to stop?
There was a fight with Jay Haran versus the Joker. I forgot the guy's name. It was back. It was like an early UFC fight, and just blood was just pouring out. It was like one of their first spike cards, and it was so much blood. It was like dripping. I felt so bad for Jay because he was winning the fight, but the guy was able to get out of there and naked choke because of the blood everywhere. Like it was essentially blood replaced sweat. That was a crazy fight. The Ben Askren one against Masvidal, just seeing him the way he fell and just seeing him kind of just lay there. And plus, I'm a huge Ben Askren fan, and I was, I used to beg Dana, literally beg him to put him in there, and like I wanted to see what would happen. And I'm actually reading Askren's book. It's a really good book, and he talks about how he beat up Masvidal in practice years before that. When he went in there, he's like Masvidal, knows how those sparring sessions went, and I kind of believe him in a way. I kind of believe that. I mean, back in Ben's prime wrestling, there wasn't many. I'm not sure they're doing striking. I'm sure they're doing no striking. I'm sure it's probably just wrestling. But that was anytime I have like a friend like get knocked out or something, it's like it's hard to watch. Even the Jake Paul Woodley, just the way Woodley fell. Yeah. And just watching Woodley's rise to where he went and then watching him get knocked out by this kid. And it's not even like, I mean, Jake Paul is just I mean, he plays a really good villain of like, you're like, oh, I want to see this fucking kid. He's probably a really nice guy who works hard. I'm sure if he was my training partner, I probably would like him. But he just has this, like, he knows what rubs people the wrong way, which is like, I'm this entitled kid that sort of bought his way to the top. It's going to put down fighters. It's going to say, fuck you to everybody. That's going to flash his NFTs and show everybody how much money he has and gets to hot girls and fuck you. And I'm the best. So to see like Tyron Woodley just get, face planted by the kid was hard. That was hard to watch. Yeah,
100%. Adam, look, man, last one from us. We don't want to keep you too long. We really value and appreciate your time very much. But look, man, last one from us. Obviously, you host the MMA Roasted podcast and have an involvement with the UFC with your special Throwing Punches and UFC Comedy Jam 1 and 2 are all available on UFC Fight Pass. How did you first become involved in MMA, and how did you correlate that to your relationship with the UFC?
Well, in MMA, it was just wrestling. Wrestling was like my life growing up. And after I wrestled in college, I quit wrestling in college after I was like a big prospect on the team. And I kind of left it with like a sour note. I was losing, 18 pounds a week, and a Division III college, that wasn't fun. And I was kind of bitter towards everything. And there was no UFC then. It was literally like Olympics, which was freestyle and Greco, which I wasn't good enough to do that. Yeah. Or that was it. So I was a boxing fan. And I started to get into MMA a little bit, but you couldn't really find it anywhere. But then I started watching it once it started coming on Spike and with The Ultimate Fighter. And then I was opening up for this guy named John Heffron, who's a funny comic. And he was hosting the MMA Awards, and he hired me to write some sketches for him. So we wrote Randy Couture, divorce attorney, and the Dear Vandy, Dear Vandy sketch. And those did very well as far as like on the internet. And then since then I wrote like All About the Cake with Daniel Cormier, and the Cringe Ass Henry with Cejudo, and the Old Town Road one with Tyron Woodley, and the one with Mark Munoz is I'm a Filipino Wrecking Ball. That one did well. And just I wrote a lot of them. The Uriah Faber, like My Butt Chin Can Twerk, and Johnny Hendricks, like I Can't Make the Weight When I Fight You Because I'm Hungry, and I Had Sugar with Shot Onions. That's my MMA slow jam. Anyway, so I ran into Dana White at a casino, and I was headlining at the Improv at the time, and I asked him to come to the show. Hey, Dana, and I told him I'm a big MMA fan. I told him I wrestled in college, and I wrote all these sketches, and we just really hit it off. Talked to me for like an hour, and this is like before Brock. This is like when Brock Lesnar first came to the UFC, kind of thing.
Yeah,
we talked about Brock, and actually, I told him that like I go, there's a guy who's going to be champion. He went to Hofstra, and Dana couldn't remember his name. I go, and then it was Chris Weidman. I was telling him about Chris Weidman, who was in the UFC, who had one fight, and I told Dana he was going to be the champion. But we just eventually hit it off, and then they hired me to make these like, because I pitched them a show I wanted to do where I drove around in a truck, and there was an octagon in the back of the truck, and you could fight the guy. Like people could sign up. It's called So You Think You're a Tough Guy, and they were like, absolutely not. We can't have octagons and trucks, and it's a kind of a safety concern. It was like a bully beatdown meets cash cab. Then the pitch went well to the point where they called me and said that they were fans of Tosh.0 and wanted to do videos where I roast fighters and roast MMA. So for 3 or 4 years, I worked for that. I made these little videos with the UFC and roasting fighters, but I would write 100 jokes and I would use like 8 of them. And as a comic, like, your jokes are like your babies, and you just hate to. And like I can't tell them on stage because even now, like other than like Ronda Rousey or John Jones, well, if I go up there and mention, if I mention Stylebender, people go, "Who the fuck is Stylebender?" It's just. So I started an MMA roasted account with all the jokes I didn't use, and then that kind of blew up there. And then Fox Sports called me up and said, "We wanted you to do this thing where you pretend your fighters texting each other during fights, and we'll call it Text from Last Fight." And then those did really well. But people thought they were actually real text chats. I put like Obama in there and this and that. So then, and then Bellator hired me to write a couple sketches for them where I would do like the history of Fedor's sweater. That was a big one because the sweater was crazy. Yeah. So then, since then, it's just been like, one of those things where Dana called me and said, "We want to produce your special." We did that during COVID. And then I said, "Why don't we have fighters tell jokes and I'll host it?" So we did 2 of those. And it's just been like, Dana's a really cool guy and has been such a nice guy to me. So nothing but positivity, thrown that way. I mean, it's been a long journey. I have to like remember that like, stand-up is my love. I love stand-up comedy. And this is just like something that I do on the side, not on the side, but it's not like my full-time job. Like my goal has never been to be a guy asking questions at one of those, press and then come back to having a website. There's a lot of guys like that who are really good at that. And that's their thing. It's just, stand-up comedy is my thing, but I just love it when I could just kind of
intertwine with
it. Yeah, right. Like even the Ben Askren one, I wrote like Ben Askren as like Adele, like "Hello from the Askren side."
Oh, that's a hilarious video.
And then Askren said like, he's like, people that didn't even call me when I made the Olympics called me and said, "I saw you in this video." The Cormier All About the Cake. I mean, literally, like I remember the Black Beast, like, "I want to fight Cormier," and he's like, "Why?" "Because he disrespected the chicken." And like that was the video that we made. So I mean, it's like the best when I could do like a fun video and then it comes out. And I remember like I wrote like they had like Dolph Lundgren was hosting the award show a couple years ago, and I had to write his monologue because he had his own jokes, which were like not about MMA, and I'm like, no. So I kind of had to redirect him, and he was a really good sport, very easy to work with, super cool. Yeah. But like my wife called me to pick her up at the airport, like, and her flight was late, so it was like right during the show. So I go to pick my wife up, and my kid threw up, so she had to go change. And I get like a text, they're like, Dolph Lundgren needs you, he's nervous. And I'm like, I mean, like I never thought I'd have the guy from Rocky IV like texting me, like, where are you? I need you.
Yeah, there you go.
That was kind of cool.
Well, look, Adam, thank you very much for joining us today, man. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, and an absolute pleasure to have you on. So look, all the best of luck for the rest of, obviously, stand up and obviously the hosting the MMA awards later this year. And enjoy the fights this weekend. I know they're going to be an absolute cracker, and we'd love to have you on again in future, man.
Anytime. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, man.